Welcome to our inaugural plotter versus pantser debate. We are completely thrilled to gather here tonight where so many people have gathered before us on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation. My name is Kate Larson. I work at Writers Victoria, and today we're here to learn from two writers about two very different approaches to novel writing. So, to meet our panel, they don't really need much of an introduction. Graeme Simsion is a plotter. He is also the author of the Rosie Project and the newly released sequel, The Rosie Effect, both of which, by the way, happen to be available for purchase at the back of the room. And he has also published short stories, plays, and short films. Paddy O'Reilly, on my left, writes by the seat of her pants. What she writes is short stories and screenplays and novels, including her brand new release, The Wonders, also available from Warren up the back after the event. So, obviously, you both approach your writing in very different ways, and I wonder sometimes if it's almost a cultural difference, as if maybe we can't understand the language each other speaks. So perhaps we'll start by, I'll ask you both just to talk through your process a little bit more. Paddy, what does it mean to be a pantser?
Well, it's a funny term, isn't it, pantser?
Pretty sexy term.
Yeah, I know, it brings up images I'm not sure I want to have associated with me, but anyway. I'm a writer in the dark, and I'm along the lines of E.L. Doctorow. I don't know if you know him, a fantastic American writer who said that when he's writing, it's like driving at night. He can see as far as his headlights go, but he can make the whole journey that way. I have a lot of false starts because what I'm doing is I'm in a process of discovery, and I think the way that I write is completely risky and completely time wasting, but it to me is a complete revelation because this is how I discover what I want to write about. I have, in fact, in the past, I wrote a book called The Fine Colour of Rust, and that was a book, and the narrator of that book is stayed in my head. Absolutely love her, and I still think I might write about her one day. And about, 6 months, a year after that book had come out, I woke up one morning and in my head was a complete plot for a sequel to that book, to The Fine Colour of Rust. It had a major plot, it had two subplots, it had characters who I could see, and I thought, wow! And I ran to the desk and I wrote it down, and I completely lost interest in it the next day. For me, there are four great writing tools, and the first one is a notebook, and the second one is once you get onto the computer and you put everything into the computer, it's Scrivener, if you know that software program. And then the other tool that I really love, and this is particularly useful for someone who flies by the seat of their pants, because I don't know whether you've ever had this problem, but every now and then I'll have written something and great big blobs of text here and there and everywhere, and then I'll be looking at a scene and there's Jane is having a great coffee with Mary in Brunswick, and then I'll realise, oh, actually she's in Paris. She can't be in Brunswick. Or, she had blue eyes 3 years ago and suddenly they've gone brown. Or she's meeting Mary and Mary died last month. All of those things. So for that I use Eon Timeline. You put an event, you put who was there, and, as soon as you click on the event, you see who was there, what age they were, and so on. And so you can't have people doing two things in a different place at the same time. So it's fantastic for fixing up those problems that occur, I think, much more often with people who write by the seat of their pants. Yeah. So, and that's
Great.
So that's basically my process.
So torturous but revealing. Graeme, how does the process work for you?
Well, it's a lot more similar to Paddy's process than I might have thought, because as soon as Paddy mentioned Scrivener and Eon, these are planning tools.
No, they're post-planning tools.
Well, okay, so let's take away the word planning and talk about plotting, because I think the essence of plotting is that you maintain some sort of a higher level picture of your story. And I think the difference between Paddy and me is that I will have that high-level picture in place before I write a single word of my draft, in the ideal world. But both of us, it seems, after we've written that first draft, will actually put that high-level view in place, whether we use Scrivener and colours and so forth, whether we use Eon, in order to get some sort of an overview picture of what's going on to enable us to do a sort of structural edit to what we're doing. Now, so that puts both of us to the right of, say, Zadie Smith, who calls herself a micro-manager. A macro... I can't remember now. She's a pantser, okay? And the way she describes it is she writes the first sentence, gets it right. She writes the second sentence, gets it right, and when she's finished, she's finished. Now, I'm not sure if her editor agrees with her there, but that is a very extreme sort of view, as I would read it, of pantsing. But what I hear you doing is you do structural work, but you do it after you've written the first draft. So you find story and character in the first draft, but after that, I think we would find our own processes would be quite similar, and in fact, I use less sophisticated tools. That is the Rosie effect, laid out using the screenwriter's classic tool of 4x5 index cards. Every scene of the Rosie effect, and the pink ones are the ones with Rosie in it. In fact, it's who is the main character in the scene, other than my narrator, who's Don, who's in every scene, because it's a first-person narrative. And I can looking at that, I can see where the act breaks are. I can see particularly where my character Rosie is present in a scene, because that was an issue for the book. Are we being away from her for too long? And I can see that all laid out graphically. Now, that is not, in fact, what I did before I started. Correction, it is exactly what I did before I started, but that photo was not taken before I started. That photo was taken after I'd completed the draft, put it back on the cards, or reshuffled the cards to show what the draft really looked like.
So you had the cards in a different order, or...?
What I did was I had the cards, worked out exactly what I wanted to do before I started writing, and that's where the difference would lie. That I had the cards all laid out, and I'd actually written descriptions of each scene. So I'd done what screenwriter would call a scene breakdown, where I've said, here, Rosie will announce to Don that she's pregnant and Don will have a meltdown. Okay, so there it is, it's nice and clear. I know what's going on, and I know where it will happen to. In Don's apartment, this will happen. And with that in place, I will start writing. Now, this is not a straitjacket. This is a guide. So as I write, I will, as you know, there's no simple black and white here, I will discover things. The plot logic will require that certain things happen. So I'll say, what would my character do here? And it won't be what I planned, so I have to move it. And what I tend to find, if I can elaborate on this, is that I stick pretty closely for the first quarter. The second half, I tend to have to do reshuffling afterwards, mainly to get escalation in. That, you know, you don't want Hercules to have the toughest of his labours first. You want to build escalation to that second act. And then the third act, the final quarter or so, if that's a 3-act sort of structure, I will find a lot of things change. That by that stage, it's, you know, I've got that ending as a guide, but maybe my ending will change because I find another way through, almost writing by the seat of my pants. So I think the crucial thing for me as a plotter is that I maintain this higher level view, which in my case is on the cards. I'm starting to use Scrivener with my next book. I'm playing with Scrivener, and that essentially offers me an electronic version of what I do on the cards. But I'm maintaining that picture at all times. I've got it there before I start. I've got it there as I write that first draft. It's my guide. I update it as I write, and then I come back and do a complete re-look at the whole thing of what I've written and recast it again for the second draft. So it's that back and forth. It's that back and forth sort of process. Paddy writes successful books that I'm guessing she is happy with doing it her way. I'm happy with the results I get doing it my way. If it's working for you, don't change a thing. But where I'm frequently advising people to move from pantsing to plotting is when they have some pretty predictable sorts of problems. They say, I'm a pantser, I got to 30,000 words and I got lost. The story was going nowhere, so I tossed it aside, started a new book. And after they'd done it a couple of times and started talking about using creativity techniques and maybe I should smoke more dope or less dope, you know, whatever it is, or I should do the morning pages or whatever special creativity technique you have, that's at the point to say, why don't you try plotting? So yeah, that's probably where I'm positioned on this. If pantsing's working for you, I had two teachers when I was studying novel writing. Both of them were pantsers, and they basically said, look, that's the way I work, so it's pretty hard for me to teach in detail any other way. And then you find some students can make it that way and some can't.
There's a lot of pressure to write a certain way. You might have a teacher that writes a certain way, or you're in a writing group where the people think it's, this is the right way to write. There's no right way to write except the one that works for you. So, on the other hand, from that thing, I've actually had people who were plotters who I've said to them, throw out your plot. It's not working, because what they're trying to do is do a plot that's like a genre novel, and it ends up being very predictable. So they're the kind of people who need to actually swap to the other side and find their own way to do it. And if you do find that you're following that genre thing and writing a very predictable, if you're writing a crime novel and it's predictable, then it's dead. You actually have to surprise people all the time in a crime novel, and sometimes you need to surprise yourself in order to do that. So there have been occasions when I've had to advise that to people, to throw away the plot, or keep the bones of it, but just let yourself go. And then people have said to me, but you'd save so much time if you plotted it out beforehand, which is absolutely true, I think.
And you
It's
both talk
absolutely
about
true.
dabbling in each other's mediums.
You can't be a purist either. I mean, despite what someone like Zadie Smith would say, it's sexier to be a pantser. It's not just a name. It's cooler to say, I just sat down and I wrote this thing as it flowed out of me. And I think one of the things, and it sounds magical. Whereas I sat down and I planned the whole thing using a software tool. Yeah, cool. It sounds like a wonderful piece of art. The elephant in the room here is the subconscious. You might say consciously, I'm just making it up as I go along, but how much is in your subconscious mind about what that plot and so forth might be? How do you know where to go? I mean, again, taking Zadie Smith and reading her approach, she says, for the first 20 pages are agonising, they're really, really hard, and after that it flows better. I'm thinking, what's your mind doing, consciously or unconsciously, in those first 30 pages, if not possibly laying out the bones of a plot that you are then going to follow without necessarily consciously recognising you're doing it. And my own sort of view on this is that it's often better to surface as much as you can and make it conscious, rather than constantly rely on things happening without thought.
The other elephant in the room that we're not mentioning is genre. Is genre a more plottable kind of novel?
Yeah, look, I think absolutely. And look, let's be clear. If you don't want a plot, then it's pretty stupid to be a plotter. If what you're trying to write is I mean, seriously, there is literary fiction out there where the plot is certainly not the greatest attribute of the work, and the writer would say, look, I didn't want a plot. That wasn't what I was trying to do. So clearly, if that's what you're attempting to do, but on the other hand, if you want a tightly plotted crime novel, something where all the loose ends actually make sense in the end, where there are lots of twists and turns, I guess my natural inclination would be to plot it out first, and then when you write it, you may still surprise yourself. Again, it's not a straitjacket. I get plenty of surprises when I write, but those surprises tend to be at the more detailed line-by-line level rather than the where is the story going. Now, I've come from a background which says you look at what's done, and if what's done is a thing of quality or not of quality, that's how you make the judgment, not by what method someone went along to do it. You don't criticise that at that point. If it's no good, you can say maybe we can find a fault in the method. Sure. If it's wonderful, you say maybe we can learn something from the method. But the method itself is not the reason that you criticise the output.
Speaking of the method, I guess is it just as easy to, in the same way you can get 20,000 words that doesn't go any further, can you get a beautifully constructed pile of cards, plotted cards that a story doesn't rise to fill?
No.
No.
No, and I would say if you have the whole thing plotted out carefully on cards with scene summaries, you will be able, assuming you can put two words together, you will be able to write that story. Now, whether you write it in beautiful prose will depend on how well you put a sentence together. I mean, it doesn't guarantee the spelling will be right. It doesn't guarantee the grammar or the sentences will be beautiful, but it does guarantee that the arc of the story, the plot, will make as much sense as it did laid out on cards. It does guarantee there will be an ending that makes as much sense as it did laid out, and so on. So you do know when you've got the cards laid out and you start writing, you shouldn't get writer's block. In fact, if you feel like you're getting writer's block, as I might have sometimes because, you know, I've got a hangover or whatever, and I don't feel like writing, I say, I can still write those 5 scenes. They won't necessarily be deathless prose, but they will be editable, and we might be able to lift them. They will at least take the story in the direction it's meant to go. And let's face it, there are the writers who are most frequently criticised. I mean, let's pick Dan Brown, for example. Dan Brown is...
I'm ready to criticise.
Dan Brown is widely criticised by the literary community, but his books sell in the millions. Essentially, they are... the stories work at some level. The argument is usually about the quality of the writing. They get down, it happens. Now, maybe someone who is a much better constructor of sentences could go through that with the same story and make a better job of it. But you are guaranteed an outcome of the story being told.
Yeah, but I do have to say about Dan Brown that he had 5 books that didn't go well, and then he had one that did. So there's no guarantee that you write a good plot and write it in pretty bad prose and that you're going to have a bestseller.
No, and I'm not suggesting it is, but I'm suggesting that there are books out there which have very clear stories which are not brilliantly well written, and they often are the stuff of best-selling popular fiction.
You mentioned writer's block before. Do you think writer's block is the sole domain of the pantser?
No.
Oh, no.
No, everybody can have... I think that the problem for the pantser is much greater than the problem for the plotter. The plotter at least knows where the story is going next.
Yeah, perhaps. I think most people get writer's block at some point, and I don't think it's about whether you know where you're going or not. I think it's about fear and about lack of confidence in yourself, and it's about you just not believing you can do it at a very deep level. And it's a matter of overcoming that, and whether you overcome that by just writing any old thing, or whether you overcome that by plotting out something and following that trajectory of the plot. Again, you have to find the thing that works for you, and it's very different for very different people.
See, part of it is that I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. It's very hard for me anyway to be plotting, to be developing characters and writing deathless prose all at once. If I have written... if I already know who my characters are very clearly, because that's part of my plotting or planning, if I know what the scene is going to do, then all of my concentration is on writing this as well as I possibly can. And because I've been writing comedy, I can look at the one-liners about things like that without worrying about who's the character here, where's it going. So part of the reason for doing it is to separate those levels of creativity so that you plot first, one level of creativity, establish characters, that's over there too, and they're obviously interrelated, and then you say, all right, another level of creativity is actually adding the detail, the prose.
We both talked about particular writers who work in different styles tonight, and one of the things we find a lot at Writers Victoria, and in fact the reason we're here tonight, is that we as writers are fascinated, absolutely fascinated by the writing processes of authors we admire and authors we whose work we don't admire. Why do you think that is? Why do you think are we looking for the magic bullet? Are we trying to find the right way when there is no right way?
I think it's, when you're writing, it's not like when you're at work and you have something that you've been taught how to do. You can go to a writing class and you'll have a teacher who will say, this is how I do it and everything, but again, no one can teach you the way that you need to write. That is really about you finding it, and that causes, I think, a huge amount of anxiety in people, and that anxiety sends us off to read the Paris Review interviews and all of the interviews with writers and And, do you write with a pen or a computer, and where do you get your ideas from? And all of those questions come from that level of anxiety about, is there a better way to do it than I'm doing it? Because it's not easy. It's, writing isn't easy. It is a process, and so, I don't know, some people make it seem easy, and I think that's just bullshit. It's not.
I think that there are a lot of people who want to be writers. And what I always sort of throw out and say, what's the most important advice you'd give to a would-be writer? I say, imagine you want to be a neurosurgeon. And just put in your head the amount of work you're going to have to do to get there. Have that lined up, because you'd be enrolling in a medical course, you'd be doing all these things, you'd be specialising over a period of a lot of years. Now, put in mind, there are more jobs around for neurosurgeons than there are for successful writers of fiction, and there are more people looking for those jobs as successful writers of fiction than there are who want to be neurosurgeons. So
about 100 million more.
Yeah. So this is a picture of how much work needs to be done. And for very practical reasons, an awful lot of people who want to be writers can't put in that amount of work. They've got families, they've got day jobs, they've got all those sorts of things. So I think that anxiety is a well-placed, a well-founded anxiety, because they're probably not going to make it.
It's true.
It's a simple reality. So what you start looking for is there a get-rich-quick scheme here? Does a writer, does a famous writer have a special routine? Is there some way they can work? See, the point is, you're a pantser. Okay, but how much practice has gone into being able to do that?
That's right.
It's not like you can say, just sit down and write what you want, because if you give that advice to anyone, they're going to be in all sorts of trouble. And likewise, if I say, plot it out on the cards, yes, they'll probably get a story, but it will probably be genre, and it will probably, something they've seen before, and it probably won't be written all that brilliantly, because you don't just start hacking on someone's head. This is going to take a long time to get to.
Yeah.
So you're hearing two people who have put in a lot of hours to get to write books, and that stuff is not necessarily, it's like you're asking us, how do you do brain surgery? How do you any tricks? You say, well, a little trick that I'd like to give you, Paddy, is that when you cut off that that circulation there, I always use that clamp.
Always clamp.
Yeah, I always clamp there.
Yeah.
And you're sitting out there. If you're not brain surgeons, stop listening. Don't try this at home. So there's no shortcut. Some people are dead lucky, but it's not the way to bet.
It all does come back to, do you want to be a writer, or do you want to write? Because you really need to write and, find that way of writing for yourself.